Welcome to another morning episode of Liberty Dad Podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. If you're tuning in live, then I especially thank you for giving me your time so early. There's a video floating around of a motorcyclist getting brake checked by an officer. So let's get into the show. All right. So, first things first, I'm going to be talking a little bit about this video that I saw from a motorcyclist. He's getting brake checked by an officer. And then we're going to talk about qualified immunity, kind of tie that in together. So, the first thing that we need to get out of the way is that I am not a lawyer. So, nothing here is legal advice. I'm simply a guy who's got a podcast, who reads, deciphers information, and makes the best determination of what it means to my ability. And then I try to communicate that to other people. You can decide for yourself whether my interpretation of things is accurate, and so on and so forth. So if you're ever looking at any of this, this video, if you're watching it and you're like, hey, if you're a lawyer and you're like, hey, dude, you got that totally wrong. Go ahead and let me know. If you're somebody who's not a lawyer and you're like, oh, I think Liberty Dad, he's the guy to listen to for my legal advice. Don't do that. Do not listen to me for legal advice. Contact a lawyer. I'm just simply offering an opinion in the sphere of ideas because that's where I operate. So let's get into it. So this video is actually a bit old, and that kind of brings up a very interesting point. When you're on social media, there is a lot of old material floating around. So be very mindful. In fact, it kind of reminds me years ago when my mama was alive and she would send me an email and then I would read it and I would say, Mom, that's like old news and that's actually not even accurate, so on and so forth. She would send me these emails about some event. And sometimes the event it did happen, but sometimes the telling of that event, because it was so distant. Like the event had happened, sometime earlier. And then by the time it ended up in this email, it was, kind of, there was some misinformation. So be mindful about some of these things that we see on social media because sometimes people repost stuff. And when it gets reposted, it's, maybe not always so accurate. Kind of like the video that I did yesterday when I was talking about the governor of, what's the governor of Oregon who passed the law regarding um, reducing the requirements to test. Um, Drawing a blank here. The essential skills test. So there was an essential skills test that was required for graduation in Oregon, and they suspended it. But then this meme a couple of years later pops up, and it says, "Hey, they're removing the requirements for learning reading, writing, and math," which is not true. So just be mindful. But this video comes from a guy named he goes by Hyped Life, and he's a motorcyclist in South Florida, and he had his GoPro on, and it's about a minute clip or something like that. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do something a little different than I normally do. Normally, what I do is I just play the video and then talk about it afterward. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna stop the video at certain points and I'm gonna make some comments, or maybe I'll just comment as we're watching the video. It's not a very long video. And I will warn you, it does show the motorcyclist getting into a wreck at the very end, but he was unharmed in any significant way. So just put that out there so that nobody is alarmed at 7 a.m. in the morning watching somebody get into a wreck. So let's go ahead and play that video. Bring this, let's see. I guess I did not have this set up quite as well as I should have. So give me just a moment. There it is. All right, so here we are. All right, so this is the beginning of our video. It looks good on the screen, so let's go ahead and watch.
We got a beautiful day out today.
It is beautiful, as usual in Florida.
It's not too windy when we get out there.
Now, the first thing we want to point out is you can see here on the screen that his speedometer is blurred out. And then as we watch, we'll see that he's just flying by cars. So point that out there. All right, a little bit of weaving there, not too bad. Now notice this car up right up in front of him. His car has been kind of in the screen in the camera view for a fair amount of time in this video.
Nah, there's no way that's a cop, bro.
All right. So what I think is happening is I think that he is communicating with some of his pals that are behind him. I think I'm not entirely certain about that, but I think that's who he's talking to in this video.
Whoa, what are you doing,
Okay. So first brake check because there's actually two in this video.
bro? Oh, maybe it is.
All
Oh
right. So
shit,
now
he.
now he's alerted it
Why
may
are
be
you
an
brake
officer.
checking me?
All right. Brake light. All right. Then all of a sudden he comes to a stop
What?
and bam. All right. There he is. Nice little
You
wreck
gotta.
there. All right. So let's go back and let's start talking about some things. And first and foremost, good morning, Hector. Thank you for tuning in so early. It's great to know that there are people that are like, you know what, I better get up very early so that I can watch an episode of Liberty Dad. So I'm pretty sure that's exactly why he was up. But at any rate, so let's go on and talk about this thing. So I'm going to talk about the issues that I have with the motorcyclist because I am a motorcyclist, and I guess if I have to be totally transparent, technically a scooterist. However, I do have a much bigger scooter, so it's not one of those little tiny Vespa types. It will go every bit 90 miles an hour. And a nice officer one time gave me receipts to or a receipt to prove it. So, as the internet says, show your receipts. I have it. So, like, whatever. But so I enjoy motorcycling. I enjoy cycling. I enjoy being on two wheels, period. So, this video was kind of an interest to me. But the first thing that I have, I'm going to talk about the issues with the motorcyclist and then some issues with the officer, and then we'll move on. So the first thing that I have is that he's weaving a little bit, but I don't think it was too reckless. I've seen people on motorcycles, weaving much worse than that. He was just kind of going in and out a little bit, and it didn't seem to be too tight. But it's not something I would have personally done. But I wasn't too alarmed by it when I watched it. He is definitely speeding. And the reason that you can tell that he is speeding, and maybe we can even go back to that video real quick and let's see, let's put that back up on the screen. So let's see, there we are. And what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to move it so we can see here that at the very beginning, his speedometer is blurred out. And then we get here further along in the video, it's still blurred out and then still blurred out. Let's see here. Where does it catch up here? All right, so this is where he's having that first interaction with the officer. Okay, perfect. So now after the first brake check, he removes the blur from his speedometer. And so we can see he's at 78 miles an hour. So this is the point where he's already slowing down. So he was clearly going faster than 80 miles an hour. And I totally get it. Going fast on a motorcycle, a lot of fun. Totally get it. But he was speeding and he was right. In my opinion, he was right to blur it out before posting it on YouTube, which by the way, the link is in the show notes if you want to see his whole video and the commentary at the video after the accident. You don't see it because of the accident, but you can hear that he's getting arrested. The officer accuses him of tailgating. I don't quite agree with that. Um, but and then the guy offers his own commentary on it. So you can click on the link there and check that out later. So we see that he's going 78 miles an hour here, and he's okay. So he sped up a little bit at 79, and then at this point, starting to slow down, right? And then we keep moving. Let's see here, move that. So there we go, 74, and then right as the lights come on, right? So we got the lights right here. The lights come on right about 72 miles an hour, and then all of a sudden he starts dramatically slowing down and then the point of impact was at about 47 miles per hour. So he hits the officer at 47 miles per hour. Definitely a scary thing. Would not want to have that happen to me. Okay. So he's clearly speeding, and by the time he recognizes that this may be an officer, he does slow down. He ends up slowing down to about 78 miles an hour. And then of course, right before the accident, the point of impact is at about 47 miles an hour. So not necessarily good. In my opinion, and you kind of see that his head, or at least because the camera is mounted on his helmet, and it looks to me like he has shifted his view a little bit as the officers has slowed down. And from my perspective, and it's hard because I wasn't there and I'm watching a video, so everybody's a Monday morning quarterback. And but it looks like there is sufficient time, had he been properly paying attention, to move over and jump into the shoulder on the left side and avoid a collision with the officer. So I think that maybe he might have avoided the accident itself in, being a little bit more mindful of the event. Because remember, he got brake checked the first time, and then he's still behind the same car. Okay. So whenever I'm writing, one of the things that I always assume is that people want to wreck into me. And it's not because I think they actually do, it's because that's what keeps me vigilant. Because at the end of the day, I got a son and a wife to come home to. And I particularly enjoy my life. So now let's move on, and we're going to talk about issues with the officer. So there was that first brake check. I'm I don't think, and we're going to get into it in a moment. I don't think that brake checks are a good idea. I definitely think that the officer should not have, but I don't take a huge issue with the very first one. The very first one was kind of quick and they moved on. And, the guy even recognizes, like, whoa, what's going on here? This guy just brake checked me. What the heck? So I don't have a big, huge issue. However, the officer did move over into his lane. So, and it seems at that point that it's unclear to the motorcyclist whether or not the car in front of him is an officer. Although he does, he mentions it and he suspects it. And in my position is, whenever you suspect that it's an officer, then you just treat it as an officer. That's just the best way. That's just best practice, in my opinion. The second brake check, though, appears to come to a full stop. It's a little unclear because everything moves so quickly. But the issue that I really have is that it escalates the situation. This is the reason why I don't approve of brake checking in the first place, because it escalates a situation unnecessarily. And in this particular case, it did lead to an accident. And in my opinion, the officer, what he should have done, if he felt like, hey, the first brake check wasn't good enough, now I need to step things up, then he should have just pulled the man over. He should have just pulled him over in the proper manner, making sure to leave plenty. Like, if he had stayed in front of him, he should have made sure to leave plenty of time for the motorcyclist to slow down. And it doesn't appear that he did that. So now that becomes this gets us to the question of, is brake checking illegal? Well, as far as I can tell, it is not, but it may be considered reckless driving. So let's take a look at. So I went and I looked this up to the best of my ability, and I figure, you know what? I'm not a lawyer, but I found a law firm that talks about it. So we're going to pull that up. So let's go ahead and share that screen, and then we will. Let's see here, and then we will zoom in on this so that you can read it if you're watching. You know, on a tiny little screen. Make it a little bit bigger here. How about that? Okay, perfect. All right. So so this title is from Allen Law Firm, and I found a couple of them that basically said the same thing. So this one titled "Car Accidents Caused by Brake Checking in Florida," and so we're scroll down here, and he says, tailgating is a dangerous practice that constitutes a non-criminal moving violation under Florida law. So tailgating is specifically enumerated. Yes, not right now, not right now, buddy. You'll have to wait. You have to ask mommy. Being a Liberty dad, guys, that's how it goes. All right, so he apparently found that funny. That's awesome. So, Florida police officers can issue a citation when a driver follows too closely, resulting in a fine if the driver cannot give a legal justification for tailgating. So, tailgating itself is, in fact, it is considered a crime. It's a violation under Florida law. So, we move down here, and it says, but Florida law is less clear about the legal status of brake checking. Florida has no traffic law criminalizing brake checking, but a driver who brake checks could still face criminal and civil liability, depending on the driver's intent, the circumstances surrounding the brake check, and the harm resulting from the incident. So he goes on, he's talking about what is brake checking, and we all kind of have an idea of what it is. he does point out here on this law firm, he says the leading driver could have a few reasons for brake checking. That's prompting the tailgater to back off, which is usually what we do. Um, Punishing the tailgater, that also happens. Communicating frustration to the tailgater, fair enough. I think that's a little whatever. And then teaching the tailgater a lesson. That's most of the time when I hear stories, someone's like, "Yeah, I brake just check this guy." They are trying to teach the tailgater a lesson. But most drivers who do brake check, okay, well, you have to wait, son. Then you're gonna have to wait till later. All right. So most drivers who brake check do not intend to cause a collision, but brake checking significantly increases the risk of causing a car accident, which I totally agree with. So we're going to skip this section here. We're going to come down. He's talking about whiplash and all this other stuff. So we'll get down here. Concussion, blah, blah, blah. All right. So criminal consequences of brake checking. So again, he says Florida laws do not specifically prohibit brake checking, and as a result, the leading driver will not receive a ticket for brake checking. So this fact will become very important in just a moment. But the leading driver might face worse consequences than a ticket. Reckless driving happens when a driver operates a vehicle with willful or wanton disregard for the safety of others, which means the driver understood the danger posed by a brake check but dismissed or ignored it. And the sentence, if you are cited for reckless driving, could be up to 90 days in jail and a $500 fine. Could be up to 1 year in jail and up to $1,000 fine if the driver causes an accident. So the first one is if you did it. The second one is if you caused an accident, and then the third one is up to 5 years in jail and up to $5,000 fine if the accident causes a serious injury. So now again, this is if you're convicted of reckless driving. So if you don't cause an accident, it just be 3 months in jail and $500 fine. If you do cause an accident, 1 year in jail, and then if you cause serious injury, it's up to 5 years. So if you brake check and that brake check is determined to constitute reckless driving, according to this website. Again, I am not a lawyer. I'm just simply reading and making an interpretation of what I'm reading. If those things play out in that manner, you're caught brake checking and you are determined to have been reckless driving, because again, brake checking itself is not illegal under Florida statute, then you could face these particular penalties. So I think this is a good reason to not brake check for just us regular schmoes, because it could lead to some serious consequences. However, what about officers? Well, and especially unmarked vehicles, right? Like if it's a marked vehicle, well, at least we know who it is, right? We know, hey, this is an officer. And more than likely, when we see a marked vehicle, everybody slows down. Everybody does whatever they're doing that they know that they shouldn't be doing, they stop doing. Okay. So my personal opinion is that officers also should not brake check. The number one reason, because I'm a libertarian, I don't believe that with very, very few exceptions, should an officer be allowed to do anything that a regular citizen cannot do. Now, for my libertarian friends out there who might be watching and say, wait a minute, what do you mean with very few exceptions? So I mean like arresting somebody, taking them in, those sorts of things. Okay. I don't think it's a good idea for citizens to necessarily go around and arresting people and doing the things that they need to do to arrest somebody. My anarchist friends may argue with that. That's fine. We can have that argument later. But for the most part, I believe that officers should be subjected to the same governing laws that their citizens are. And I think it actually should be more, the penalties for them violating them should be increased. And the reason is because officers are trained. They are trained how to behave in certain situations. And one of the things that I believe that officers should always be trained is to de escalate a situation. And as we've already seen, this can escalate a situation and it can do it in various ways. We could turn things into road rage. You could have a situation where one driver, in this case, is trying to brake check the driver behind him. The driver behind him gets annoyed and says, "F you, guy," and then starts tailgating him just to show him whatever. So you have this escalation of a situation that can happen, and I think that it's an officer's duty, in my opinion, to de-escalate situations. The other reason is If they are wrong, then they are covered by something called qualified immunity. And basically, that ends up meaning that they're going to ultimately be treated different than other motorists. Okay. Now, you might be asking, now I know my libertarian peers, anybody that's libertarian is watching, they know exactly what qualified immunity is because the Libertarian Party, libertarians, one of the few things that we all agree upon is that qualified immunity needs to be removed. In other words, we should get rid of it. So, what is it for my friends who are not necessarily familiar with qualified immunity? Well, it's a legal immunity that protects government officials, officers, from lawsuits that allege that the official violated a person's rights, and it only allows lawsuits where officials have violated a clearly established statute or a constitutional right. Now, with things in law that kind of, the way they're written and all that, and it can kind of make it a little difficult for people to understand what this means. But to break it down, I think you can just summarize it by saying if it's not specifically enumerated in like the law that you have this protection, or whether it's the Constitution or statute, then and they violate it, or they do this thing, they are protected. Now, to make this a little easier to understand, I have a video. And this video comes from Reason Magazine. And it shows kind of an idea like how this might play out. It's a little silly, but it's fun to watch. So let's pull that video up and then let's see what qualified immunity looks like in practice. It's,
What? Wrong guy.
oh, so often.
Please help me. Me. God. Let him up. Oh, God, my arm. You broke my arm. I'm going to sue you for everything you've got. Case dismissed. What?
What?
Qualified immunity, it's not for you, it's just for me. I shot your dog. I shot your wife. I get to go on with my life. It's not that you don't have some rights, but when we get you in our sights, we can't be sued. You've got no case. It's time for you to learn your place. Qualified immunity, it strips all liability. I stole your cash. I broke your jaw. Look it up, it's settled law. Qualified immunity, we get off without penalty. I broke down your front door while serving a search warrant on the wrong house at 3 a.m. and then I shot you in the face.
Pretty sure that's happened a time or two.
Twice. Oh dear.
Okay, see you later. Yeah. But
All right. So a little silly, but it kind of shows you how qualified immunity plays out through puppets, which I thought was a bit amusing. And you can actually look up qualified immunity cases or cases where qualified immunity was used. What I think of qualified immunity, I think of it very much like those cases that we see in the media and the news where somebody has like, they're standing their ground. I feel like in a sense, this is a similar protection, at least in the way that people describe stand your ground. So a lot of people describe stand your ground as like this justification to get away with stuff, right? That's not entirely what it's that's not exact. In fact, that's not at all what it is. But I think that the way that a lot of people who are critics of stand your ground kind of describe it, that's how I would describe qualified immunity. And I think that describing qualified immunity in that way, where it allows you to get away with stuff, is actually more accurate than when people describe stand your ground. So, in my opinion, here, I think that the officer, let's just kind of wrap this up a little. I think the officer absolutely should not have brake checked. Whether or not he should be held civilly liable is a matter for the courts. I'm not going to sit there and say he absolutely should be. But I do think that he probably, if the motorcyclist tried to sue him, he would probably find that qualified immunity would kick in and he would not be able to. Whereas he might otherwise be able to sue if it were me who had brake checked him and caused that accident. And it's possible that I would have found myself guilty of reckless driving in that particular situation. And if I find myself as a regular citizen, if I were to find myself guilty of violating a statute of reckless driving in that particular circumstance, then I think it should hold true for an officer. An officer should equally be found guilty of reckless driving and should be subject to the same penalties that I would be. This is this is the kind of the what I was kind of getting at with this whole qualified immunity and the officers and the brake check and all this is kind of like I'm tying this all together. Now I don't know the status of this. This happened like a year ago or something like that, so I'm not entirely certain whether or not the motorcyclist pursued it. I suspect that he didn't, for any number of reasons, but mostly because if he did contact a lawyer, the lawyer probably told him you have no case here. But again, the question is, if it had been me that had been doing the brake check, would there have been a case? I think there might have been. And in either case, I think that the driver would be wrong. This is not a good thing. We should not escalate situations, and we should hold our police to at least, at the very minimum, the same standard. But I do believe that it actually should be a higher standard because police go through training and we expect them to enforce the law. And so, therefore, people aren't expecting me to enforce the law. So there's no need for me to necessarily be trained or to be held to a higher standard. Holding me to a specific standard is just fine. And saying, "Hey, DL, there are certain things you can do. There are certain things that you cannot do." Period. But then when it comes to an officer who gets this kind of training, who has this authority, I mean, they can pull you over, they can do all kind of things. So it is my opinion that they should be held to a higher standard, and we should get rid of qualified immunity. And I think there are many very serious cases where qualified immunity did protect an officer. So I hope you enjoyed the show, folks. That's what I have for today. Again, I want to thank you for watching and be sure to catch me every morning. I'm getting up now every morning at 5 a.m. so I can prepare. And we're going to have a show Monday through Friday at 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for an informed discussion on politics and culture. And then again, join me Sunday evenings at 7 p.m., where I bring on a co host, Susan Hogarth, and we're going to discuss LP happenings. And what LP happenings is, we simply discuss what's going on in the Libertarian Party world. So we're going to go out and we're going to find what kind of things are affiliates at the state and local level doing. And then we're going to report on them. We're going to talk about them. And we're going to say, hey, here's, some perspective or our opinion, or simply just tell you what's going on, because we want people to know that the Libertarian Party is actually a lot more active in their community than they may realize. And be sure that you do all the proper audience actions. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can go to youtube.libertydad.com. If you happen to be watching over on Facebook or on Twitter right now, make sure you ring the bell, subscribe, like videos. And you know what? If you think that I'm wrong on something, or you think I've said something, very well, then throw a word down in the comment section letting me know. You can also follow me on social media. Liberty Dad on Facebook. I'm not really on there very often. You can find me mostly on Liberty Dad Pod on Twitter. And if you really want to go old school, send me an email, libertydadpodcast@gmail.com, because I would love to hear from you. Remember, folks, if you are a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great day, and I will catch you again in the morning.